This computer. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Hello, Shabbat Shalom.
So we're proceeding with the book of Nehemiah, and we're going to read a very, very important chapter, probably one of the most important chapters, I think, in the Bible, because this is the moment that we're going to become Jews rather than people who follow the Israelite cult. So it's a really, really important chapter. We'll get there very soon. But first, let us, if you wouldn't mind muting, and then we're going to say the blessing for studying Torah. And here it is. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of all, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage in words of Torah. So we're going to begin with Nehemiah chapter 5. Who would like to read? Anybody like to read? Okay, Lori.
I can read too.
Okay, we'll start with Lori and then we'll go to Jason. Okay, let me hang on just 1 second. Get rid of this thing.
Since I wasn't here last time, and I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to watch it, can I get a very brief what happened just before, please?
Sure. All right. Who would like to enlighten Jason? Okay. I know it's hard to remember. It was a few weeks ago. Well, so we finished the book of Ezra, and Ezra is a priest and a scribe and a prophet. And he is allowed to come, well, before he comes back in his book, we hear about the rebuilding of the temple, which there were shouts of joy and there was crying, all rolled into one, because the temple was back and yet it was nothing like it was before. Remember, Solomon built this very elaborate, beautiful temple. But they do rebuild it. There are people in the community who are not at all happy to have this return of the, Israelites or whatever. There are people who are living in the land and they're not happy at all. Now, Ezra is thought to be the editor of the Torah, that it was edited in Babylonia and then he was the editor. That's what scholars think. So he is going to bring the Torah to the people. But before that, he finds out, some people come and tell him that the various, Israelites have married women who are not Israelites. And so Ezra, tears his clothing and goes into mourning and basically says and decrees that anybody who's married to a non-Israelite has to get divorced. And that includes divorcing from the wife and the kids. Now, this is the opposite philosophy from the book of Ruth, which is thought to have been written around the same time. Ruth is the opposite. You take someone who's supposed to be forbidden to the community like a Moabite, and you welcome her into the community because she is a wonderful person. So that's the opposite philosophy to this one. Now, it never says that they actually divorced their wives. So that's the redeeming feature here, is that it was decreed, that was the statement, but who knows what really happened. Now, Nehemiah is the cupbearer for the Persian emperor and is given permission to come as well. Now, it's not clear what the timeline is because, like the way it's written, it's not clear. Ezra came first and then Nehemiah, but maybe it was Nehemiah who came first. We're not sure. It doesn't really matter. And Nehemiah comes in to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, which the people who are loyal to the Persian Empire find to be a potential for rebellion. Once you secure your walls, then maybe you can rebel against the empire. And at that point, the empire loses whatever resources they have from your land. But he does build it. He's in the process of building it right now. So that's kind of where we are. Anybody want to add anything to that? Hi, Christine. We're trying to get Jason up to speed because he missed the class last time.
Jason's always. up to
Jason
speed.
and Lori.
Oh, Lori, you weren't there either? Sorry. Okay, so I think we're pretty much up to speed. Lynn is going to continue to be psychedelic. Okay, so we're going to start reading. Let's see.
Lori's muted.
Lori's going to read, but there we are. Well, let me get rid of this thing on the side here.
It helps if I unmute myself. Nehemiah helps the poor. 5. Now the men and their wives raised a great outcry against their fellow Jews. Some were saying, "We and our sons and daughters are numerous. In order for us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain." Others were saying, "We are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain during the famine." Still others are saying, "We have to borrow money to pay the king's taxes on our fields and vineyards. Although we are of the same flesh and blood as our fellow Jews, and though our children are as good as theirs, yet we have to subject our sons and daughters to slavery. Some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but we are powerless because our fields and our vineyards belong to others."
Okay, what's going on here? What's this about? Yeah, Christine.
There's class formation going on where you're getting landlords and tenants, and a real stratification that isn't just based on people's actions, but on something that is ordained.
Yeah, well, on economic exploitation, right?
Yes.
I mean, here these people have, well, they didn't just get out of slavery, but it wasn't that far away, and now they're enslaving their fellow Jews, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess they felt they needed to do that, but that's really terrible.
When
Okay.
I heard their outcry and these charges, I was very angry. I pondered them in my mind and then accused the nobles and officials. I told them, "You are charging your own people interest." So I called together a large meeting to deal with them and said, "As far as possible, we have brought our fellow Jews who are sold, we have bought back our fellow Jews who were sold to the Gentiles. Now you are selling your own people only for them to be sold back to us." They kept quiet because they could find nothing to say.
So this is about the Jews, or the community, buying back captives who are captives of Gentiles, which is something that we are supposed to do. That is one of our important mitzvot, is to redeem anybody who's been taken captive. So they've done that. They've redeemed their own from being sold to non-Jews, and yet now look what we're doing to our own people, right? As so often happens, unfortunately. Okay.
So I continued, what you are doing is not right. Shouldn't you walk in the fear of our God to avoid the reproach of our Gentile enemies? I and my brothers and my men are also lending the people money and grain, but let us stop charging interest. Give back to them immediately their fields, vineyards, olive groves, and houses, and also the interest you are charging them. 1% of the money, grain, new wine, and olive oil. We will give it back, they said, and we will not demand anything more from them. We will do as you say. Then I summoned the priests and made the nobles and officials take an oath to do what they had promised. I also shook out the folds of my robe and said, "In this way, may God shake out of their houses and possessions anyone who does not keep this promise. So may such people be shaken out and emptied." As at this, the whole assembly said, "Amen," and praised the Lord. And the people did as they had promised.
So this business about shaking out the folds of his robe apparently is sort of like emptying out your pockets to show that there's nothing in there. I mean, that was just how they did it in those days.
Moreover, from the 20th year of King King Artaxerxes, when I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, until his 32nd year, 12 years, neither I nor my brothers ate the food allotted to the governor. But the early governor, governors, those preceding me, placed a heavy burden on the people and took 40 shekels of silver from them, in addition to food and wine. Their assistants also lorded it over the people. But out of reverence for God, I did not act like that. Instead, I devoted myself to the work on this wall. All men were assembled there for the work. We did not acquire any land.
So you see-
Furthermore, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say he's not the most humble person, right? He keeps talking about all the great things he did. Yeah, go ahead.
Furthermore, 150 Jews and officials ate at my table. Oh yeah, okay. As well as those who came to us from the surrounding nations. Each day, 1 ox, 6 sheep, and some poultry were prepared for me, and every 10 days an abundant supply of wine of all kinds. In spite of all this, I never demanded the food allotted to the governor, because the demands were heavy on these people. Remember me with favor, my God, for all I have done for these people.
Well, notice he doesn't, take any food that's allotted to him and doesn't exploit the people, yet his court is quite lavish. He's got all these people eating with him. 150 Jews and officials ate at my table. That's a lot of people. So it's kind of a grand court. And obviously he amassed quite a bit of wealth while he was in Shushan. Okay. So in other words, he's not going to exploit the Jews who are living in the land of Judea, but he's got all this money. He's got some way that he's accumulated all this wealth, right? How did he get so rich? Probably in Shushan. Okay. Does anybody have any? Yeah, sorry.
Have Jason go now.
Anybody have any comments, questions, whatever? No? Okay, so we'll continue reading.
Rabbi,
Yes.
Give me a perspective of where we are. We just had Passover. Nehemiah is talking about rebuilding the wall of the second temple. So are we in the common era? Where are we historically?
No, this is the 5th century BCE.
Okay, so
Babylonian. This is not the wall of the temple. This is not the wall of the temple. This is the wall of the city of Jerusalem. It's a wall to protect the city from invaders. Okay. And yeah, and our current calendar is not relevant.
Okay, thank you.
So when the last we watched them celebrate anything, it was Sukkot. Remember when they finally had a temple to celebrate Sukkot? Just the way the Maccabees celebrated Sukkot once they got the temple back as well.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, so let's go on to the next chapter, which Jason is going to read.
Okay. Oh, good. I get some hard words right away.
Oh dear, sorry.
When word came to Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies that I had rebuilt the wall and not a gap was left in it, though up to that time I had not set the doors and the gates. Sanballat and Geshem sent me this message: "Come, let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono." But they were scheming to harm me, so I sent messengers to them with this reply: "I am carrying on a great project and cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and go down to you?" 4 times they sent me the same message, and each time I gave them the same answer. Then the 5th time, Sanballat sent his aide to me with the same message, and in his hand was an unsealed letter in which was written: "It is reported among the nations, and Geshem says it is true, that you and the Jews are plotting to revolt, and therefore you are building the wall. Moreover, according to these reports, you are about to become their king, and have even appointed prophets to make this proclamation about you in Jerusalem: there is a king in Judah. Now this report will get back to the king. So come, let us meet together." I sent him this reply: Nothing like what you were saying is happening. You are just making it up out of your head. Fake news. Sold. They were all trying to frighten us, thinking their hands will get too weak for the work and it will not be completed. But I prayed, now strengthen my hands.
Okay, so the first 4 times they sent me this message, right, in secret. The 5th time, it's an open letter, because this way they're hoping that they will make him nervous by having other people know what's going on and maybe put pressure on him to stop building the wall. And you see that the wall is provocative for them, because they think that this is the way you're going to end up revolting against me, against the king. So they're trying to trap him into coming and, like, let's all have a secret meeting. And then what's going to happen? You're going to kill him, right? Okay.
It's just in this case, the people who are telling the lies are the people who don't want the wall built, unlike our modern time.
That's very good. And it's always about a wall somehow, right? Okay, go ahead.
Nothing changes. Okay. One day I went to the house of Shemaiah, son of Deliah, the son of Mehetabel, who was shut in at his home. He said, let us meet in the house of God inside the temple, and let us close the temple doors, because men are coming to kill you. By night they are coming to kill you. But I said, should a man like me run away? Or should someone like me go into the temple to save his life? I will not go. I realized that God had not sent him, but that he had prophesied against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. He had been hired to intimidate me so that I would commit a sin by doing this, and then they would give me a bad name to discredit me. Remember Tobiah and Sanballat, my God, because of what they have done. Remember also the prophet Noadiah, and how she and the rest of the prophets have been trying to intimidate me. So the wall was completed on the 25th day of Elul in 52 days.
Wow.
When all our enemies heard about this, all the surrounding nations were afraid and lost their self-confidence, because they realized that this work had been done with the help of our God. Also in those days, the nobles of Judah were sending many letters to Tobiah, and replies from Tobiah kept coming to them. For many in Judah were under oath to him, since he was son-in-law to Shechaniah, son of Arah, and his son Jehohanan had married the daughter of Meshullam, son of Berechiah. Moreover, they kept reporting to me his good deeds and then telling him what I said, and Tobiah sent letters to intimidate me.
There you go. Okay, so you see that so the enemies are particularly afraid, because look what happened. This wall gets built in no time, despite all the odds, despite all the threats, because God is behind the Israelites, or the Jews. So, this is really, scary. If they can do this, they can do all kinds of other things. And the other thing is the idea that the nobles of Judah are sending letters to Tobiah, right? What does that suggest? These are the nobles of Judah.
They're all in it together.
Well, there are those in the like the nobility, right, who are on the side of the emperor, right? Because if you're on the side of the emperor, you get all kinds of goodies for it, right? But if you are, on the side of the Jews, then that's not exactly what the emperor wants. He doesn't want a strong Jewish population that has the ability to rebel against it, right? So there are, that's how the whole Hanukkah story started, is that the nobility was on the side of the Greeks. And there was a civil war that went on before you even had, the emperor saying, no, you're Antiochus saying, no, you cannot practice Judaism. There was first a civil war, and it was between the nobility. There was also, issue about money, and, so it was money. There's also, the nobility wanting to adopt Greek practices so that they could be part of, the ruling clan. So here you have that happening again, in a sense. The people in the country who have some power want to be on the side of the power. So that's kind of what's been going on here. Okay, the next chapter I will read because it's got ridiculous names in it. Okay, so yeah. Let me here it is, in 7. Okay, here we go. It's got a lot of names, and so we're not going to get crazy trying to say them all. I mean, the first part is it doesn't have a lot of names, but then here we go again with these lists. So after the wall had been rebuilt and I had set the doors in place, the gatekeepers, the musicians, and the Levites were appointed. I put in charge of Jerusalem my brother Hanani, along with Hananiah, the commander of the citadel, because he was a man of integrity and feared God more than most people do. I said to them, the gates of Jerusalem are not to be opened until the sun is hot. While the gatekeepers are still on duty, have them shut the doors and bar them. Also appoint residents of Jerusalem as guards, some at their posts and some near their own houses. So let me just look at 1 second here. Okay. Now the city was large and spacious, but there were few people in it, and the houses had not yet been rebuilt. So you see, they're rebuilding the walls, they're rebuilding the temple, but there's a lot of destruction. And so my God put it into my heart to assemble the nobles, the officials, and the common people for registration by families. I found the genealogical record of those who had been the first to return. This is what I found written there. These are the people of the province who came up from the captivity, the exile, when Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had taken captive. They returned to Jerusalem and Judah, each to his own town, and company was Zerubbabel, Okay. And the list of the men of Israel. Here are the names and the numbers. The men of Bethlehem and Netophah. The priests, the Levites, the musicians, the gatekeepers, the temple servants, the descendants of the servants of Solomon, the temple servants and the descendants of the servants of Solomon, those from Tel Melah, etc., the descendants of Deliah, etc., and from among the priests, the descendants of, etc. These searched for their family records, but they could not find them, and so were excluded from the priesthood as unclean. The governor therefore ordered them not to eat any of the most sacred food until there should be a priest ministering with the Urim and Tumim. Remember those little stones that you throw to find out what God's will is? And then the whole company numbered 42,000, etc., and slaves and singers and horses and mules and camels and donkeys. And then here's the money, gold and garments for the priests, and these derricks of gold and mimas of silver, and more garments for the priests. And the priests, the Levites, the gatekeepers, the musicians, and the temple servants, along with certain of the people and the rest of the Israelites, settled in their own towns. When the 7th month came and the Israelites had settled in their towns. Okay, and here we are. This is very, very, very important. This is the chapter we've been waiting for. So who would like to read the chapter we have been waiting for?
I'll read.
Okay, so Susie first, then Christine, then Jane. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
All the people came together as one in the square before the water gate. They told Ezra, the teacher of the law, to bring out the book of the law of Moses, which the Lord had commanded for Israel. So on the first day of the 7th month, Ezra the priest brought the law before the assembly, which was made up of men and women and all who were able to understand. He read aloud from daybreak till noon as he faced the square before the water gate in the presence of the men, women, and others who could understand. And all the people listened attentively to the book of the law.
Okay, let me stop you for 1 second. So first of all, where is this taking place, this reading of the law?
The square before the water gate.
It's a public square.
Square.
Okay, it's not done in the synagogue or in the temple, right?
Mhm.
Public reading for everybody. Okay, now, there are men and women. Remember at Mount Sinai, I used to work at Temple Sinai. Now at Mount Sinai, Moses said the men should get away from the women and purify themselves, remember? And so there's a whole strain of understanding this to say that women were not included in that giving of the law. But here it's very clear that the women are part of who are going to get the, get to hear this. And anyone who could understand. So it could be a kid up, I don't know, a 9-year-old might be able to understand it. So anybody who has anything to gain from listening to this, who can understand it, they're all there. Okay. And he reads it out loud. This is the origin of our reading of the Torah out loud. Okay. Now, the other thing is, when are they doing this? The 7th month. What's the 7th month? What's the first month in the
It's Rosh Hashanah.
Nope. What's the
No.
first month? No. Well, Rosh Hashanah means head of the year, but what is the first month? What is the first month in the Bible? When is Passover?
Oh,
Okay, Passover is the 15th of the month of,
Adar?
not Adar, it's the one after Adar.
Elu? No, I don't.
Nisan.
Oh,
Okay, Nisan. Now it's called Aviv in the Torah, but Aviv means spring. But in the Bible, the so-called New Year, Rosh Hashanah, is actually the month of Nisan. Okay, and Passover is the 15th of that month. So Rosh Hashanah, as we know it, is 7 months later, and that's when they're doing this. But it's not the beginning of the year. It wasn't until they had been in Babylonia that eventually they adopted the Babylonian calendar, which has the new year in the fall. Okay. Okay, yeah. And then of course, because Passover has to always fall in the spring. So in order for that to happen, we have a complicated calendar. It's a lunar calendar, except that every number of years we add another month, the month of the 2nd of Adar. And that way, Passover can always fall in the spring. So it's not a simple calendar, because why would anything be simple? Okay. Any comments or questions before we? Okay, let's move back to this important moment. And so here he is with all the people. And you're going to see he's not by himself, because Ezra's style of leadership is to include other people, whereas Nehemiah is to order other people what to do. Okay, please continue.
Ezra, the teacher of the law, stood on high wooden platform built for the occasion. Beside him on his right stood Mattathiah, Shema,
Okay, you can skip the
Anaiah,
names.
Uriah, Hilkiah, and Messiah. And on his left were Pedaiah, Mishael, Malkiah, Hashum, Hashbaddanah, Zechariah, and Mesullam.
Thank you. That was very good. It's kind of an honor guard that he's got there.
Yeah. Ezra opened the book. All people could see him because he was standing above them. And as he opened it, people all stood up. Ezra praised the Lord, the great God, and all the people lifted their hands and responded, Amen, Amen. Then they bowed down and worshiped the Lord with their faces to the ground. The Levites just
skip the names. Too much.
Skip the names?
Yes.
Okay. They read from the book of the law, making clear and giving the meaning so that the people understood which was being read.
Okay, let me stop you again. This is also very important, because they are explaining what is being read in the book, so-called book of the law, which is the Torah. And this is the beginning of Midrash, right? The moment you start reading these words, they're open to interpretation. And that's what is being done here. First time ever. And this is the first time that this so-called law is available in this democratic way to all the people. Because before this, it was the priests who had all the knowledge. And you go to the priest, and the priest would tell you what to do or whatever. But this is very, very different.
So are they speaking Aramaic?
No, I don't think
They're
so.
still speaking ancient Hebrew? Because I thought most of the Midrash was in Aramaic.
Well, what they did was, once Aramaic became the current language, then they would do a translation during the reading of the Torah into Aramaic. And that's the Targum.
I
But
see.
this is not so much translating, this is interpreting, right? Let me explain to you what this means. Doesn't mean the same thing to everybody, obviously. People use the Bible in a lot of different ways, right? So, any other questions, comments? All right.
I was just
Yes,
struck.
Jason.
Well, I was just struck by the way it switched from first person to third person in the
Oh.
middle of the narrative. It just completely lost the fact that Nehemiah was telling the story, and now, like what you were saying about Ezra, this could have been before or after, and there's no sense of placing it in clear time. So it's
That's a good
confusingly
point.
edited, I guess I would say.
Yeah, I mean, Ezra is much more humble than Nehemiah, right? So when it's Nehemiah, it's like, look what I did, and you'll see later he'll tear some people's hair out too. And Ezra is much more humble and kind of looking to have consensus. Okay, listen.
This is a stupid question, Rabbi.
I'm sure it's not stupid.
No, I really feel stupid. Is he just reading out the book of Deuteronomy? Because that's the law. Or is he reading Torah from Bereshit all the way to Bamidbar? Which one is it?
It's the whole Torah. It's not just.
Oh, he has the whole Torah.
Theoretically.
How do you get it?
Because he was supposedly.
I thought that they found only the scroll of Deuteronomy.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, that's true. That's a very excellent point. Okay, so in Josiah, we see that he found the book of Deuteronomy. So where was that, and where was the rest of it, right? So yeah, it doesn't actually work all that well with Ezra bringing the whole Torah. Like, what did he find the book of Deuteronomy and add other? The fact is, the understanding is that Ezra was the editor of the Torah.
Oh,
is that true? I don't know. Nobody really knows for sure, right?
Right.
But it's interesting that the Torah begins with exile, right? So if it were edited by people in exile, that would make a lot of sense, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, so how we got all the different pieces, how we put them together, who knows? Who knows? Right. But it's
What does it mean he edited the Torah?
Okay, so the Torah comes theoretically from a number of different documents. Okay, you have the book of Deuteronomy that may have been written by one group of priests. You have 4 main and then a lot of substrains of material that have went into the Torah. There was an oral tradition, right? You had people just saying, hey, you know what? There was a big flood and, this is what happened. And then someone else tells another story, and it all gets put together eventually. All these different strains get written down. So there, I've talked about the documentary hypothesis, which is that there are 4 main documents that went into the Torah, right? There's a northern document, a southern document, there's Deuteronomy, and so there are all these different strains that then somebody had to put together. And then the person who chose to put them together, or the people who didn't have a problem with contradiction. Like, there are 2 creation stories. Well, they put them both in. Figure it out yourself. So that's what I meant by editing, because somebody had to put it all together. Christine.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
I have a question after Christine.
Okay, Christine, go ahead.
If he's reading from daybreak to noon, well, that's an enormously long period. And so it implies that the documents that he's reading are long. Okay.
Yes.
So clearly more than one book, but that's a little bit of saying, well, maybe it doesn't start with Deuteronomy. Maybe it's before that, because there's so much that you can cover in like 6 hours straight of reading.
Yeah, can you imagine sitting there for
Oh.
that?
Well, aren't they reading and interpreting at the same time?
Exactly.
This is the
So
first
that's
time
even more
Torah
time.
read, and this is the first time Midrash is developed.
Yeah,
So it's not just a straight reading, as I understand it.
right.
Correct.
It's we're gonna, take a breath, and this is what we think it means.
Okay,
You
got it.
know,
Just think about the fact that it took us about 10 years
That's
to
right.
get through the Torah. And we
right?
didn't do it every day, and we didn't do for 6 hours at a stretch, but it does take quite a long time. Okay, Lori?
My question,
Wait, Lori had asked, go ahead. And then Elise.
my question goes back to the census. You went through it pretty fast. Do they count the women who are not slaves?
Did you see any women in the list?
No, that's why I'm asking. They counted the female slaves, but they didn't count the women.
Well, thank you. Yes, that's unfortunately what happens, is that the women don't get listed most of the time, right? That's how they did it here over and over again. So what can I say? No, Felice, did you have a question? And then Christine.
Halakha. Does that mean the book of law then, and the entire book?
Halacha is the law, and it comes from the word halach, which means to walk. So it can also be interpreted as the way.
And not the book? I mean,
No.
it's, oh,
There's no
okay.
book called halacha. Halacha is law. It's the law, right? And it comes from the Torah and then the Talmud and various codes.
Well, that's my point. Okay, it's not synonymous with the book, the Torah then. Okay. And yet
Torah has been translated as law. Okay.
Yeah.
But that is because it's from the Greek translation, and that's how the Greeks understood what we do. But Torah really means teaching. Okay.
As does rabbi. A teacher.
My teacher. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Or Torah means instruction,
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Christine, go ahead.
Are you calling me?
Yeah, Christine.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well, the censuses are always connected with some form of taxation, whether that's for, labor or goods or whatever. And so since women are not a target of that, they don't matter. They only count the goods and services that they can squeeze out of people. So slaves would count, the goods, the services, and so on. And the census taking, my advisor, my dissertation advisor, who knew a lot about state formation, Stanley Diamond, he said, look, the first full-time profession was tax collector and census taker. Okay, they were frequently the same person.
Interesting.
And that the first sort of act of resistance in terms of the state is lying to the census taker. I think he was being waggish, but the point was taken.
Thank you, Christine. Okay, Jason.
So it's something I've been thinking about in other contexts is that, we've talked about how there's scant evidence for the actual Exodus and the Egypt, but it seems interesting to me that if this were edited and assembled for really the first time at a time with an exile and a return from exile, that there's some credence to the idea that maybe they substituted the Babylonian exile as the more recent experience that they related and then plopped it onto the Exodus story. Because I know we were talking about this a couple times ago about, you would think that there would be a lot written about the hardship and experience of the travel back and forth because of how far it was from Babylon back. And yet we don't really see any of that. So it makes me wonder if they just kind of transposed all of that into Exodus. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a very interesting idea. I'll tell you another theory, not terribly widespread, but some people believe this, that it's actually the whole Exodus story is a projection from the split of the country, from Judah and Israel splitting, and people going up to the northern kingdom. And then remember, they created a couple of synagogue or temples with golden calves at the outside, right? And so they think that possibly it's a criticism of that, but put into the context of Egypt. So yeah, there isn't a lot of evidence for the Egyptian story. There's a teeny bit. But just because there's no evidence doesn't mean it's not real. But on the other hand, it could be completely made up. And it was, there was a big controversy a few years ago. Well, many years ago now. It's about 25 years, I think, because Rabbi David Wolpe of Sinai Temple in LA, is a conservative temple, gave a Passover talk where he said that the Exodus did not happen as it is recounted in the Bible. That he assumes it happened, but not that exact way. And of course, he happened to invite an LA Times reporter to be there during his sermon.
Well,
So it was written into the newspaper, and it causes huge controversy.
Oh boy.
Dennis Prager said, no Exodus, no Judaism, It doesn't have to be absolutely factually true, right? Does that, if it's not factually true, does that negate the whole thing? Or is there such a thing as truth without actual fact? Like,
Rabbi, as I understand it, Rabbi Wolpe actually was basing his sermon on a book that had come out. I think it's by Silberman, and I don't remember who the co-author. They're two archaeologists, and they're the ones who said the Exodus did not take place, in the 12th century,
right,
or, whatever, took place much later, blah, blah, blah. And that was what his sermon was based on. But he ended his sermon, or he said in another sermon, and this was probably in response to Prager, that's what I would think. He said, it doesn't matter.
Right.
This is part of our legend. This is part of our history, whether it's true or not. It doesn't have to be carved in stone. I'm making a pun.
No, absolutely.
It's what we believe, and we act on these beliefs. This is the basis of our conduct.
Absolutely.
Isn't that true about the Torah, period?
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. That's what he was saying. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter. People think, my mother was one of these people. If I can point to just one example where it didn't happen, it means the whole thing didn't happen. And it was just, she was very secular, and this just didn't resonate with her at all.
Right.
But
well, it's
for
similar
us, it does.
Yeah. Well, it's similar to the oil lasting for 8 days.
Yes.
It never happened.
Uh-huh.
Or how about George Washington chopping down the cherry tree?
Yeah.
Right.
We tell these stories because they contain a truth, even if they are not factually true.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a myth we tell about ourselves. So the Exodus story contains values that are very important to us. I'd say the most important one is circumstances do not define your fate, right? I mean, you don't have, like in Greek stories, you have a fate and you cannot do anything against it. And we believe that, you can change the circumstances of your life, and you can come out of Mitzrayim, which is narrow places, into a place that's flourishing, And so that's the important message, I think, of the Exodus. And so it cares whether, it happened. According to the Bible, if they calculate, when it was supposed to have happened, it would have happened in the 15th century BCE, but it happened in the 13th century. Big deal, where there's 600,000. Listen, if there were 600,000 people plus children and wives and all of that,
a lot of people.
They would have already been in Israel, just lining up right from Egypt.
Right.
So there are a lot of things about it that that are problematic, but it's our mythology, right?
Yeah. And I was just also thinking, the physical distance from Babylon to Jerusalem is much longer, and there is desert in between. So that's what made me think that you could actually have had a very extended wandering. And
yeah, that's it's an interesting idea. I like it. It's very creative. Okay, so let's, who was reading? Susie, were you reading?
Yeah.
Busy with reading.
Okay, here we are.
Then Nehemiah the governor, Ezra the priest and teacher of the law, and the Levites who were instructing the people said to them all, "This day is holy to the Lord your God. Do not mourn or weep." For all the people had been weeping as they listened to the word of the Lord. Nehemiah said, "Go and enjoy choice food and sweet drinks, and send some to those who have nothing prepared. This day is holy to our Lord. Do not grieve, for the joy of the Lord is your strength." The Levites calmed all the people, saying, "Be still, for this is a holy day. Do not grieve." Then all the people went away to eat and drink, to send portions of food, and to celebrate with great joy, because they now understood the words that had been made known to them. On the second day of the month, the heads of all the families, along with the priests and the Levites, gathered around Ezra the teacher to give attention to the words of the law. They found written in the law, which the Lord had commanded through Moses, that the Israelites were to live in temporary shelters during the festival of the 7th month, and that they should proclaim this word and spread it throughout their towns and in Jerusalem. Go out into the hill country and bring back branches from olive and wild olive trees, and from myrtle, palms, and shade trees, to make temporary shelters, as it is written. Was that Sukkot?
Yeah.
Yes, I was going to ask which festival this is. Thank you. Yes, and Sukkot, just the way the Maccabees celebrated Sukkot when they finally got to the temple. Now these people have finally, heard the law, and now they're able to finally celebrate again. Although, according to Robert Alter, it's unlikely that they had not celebrated Sukkot since Joshua. But hey, who knows?
So the people went out and brought back branches and built themselves temporary shelters on their own roofs, in their courtyards, and in the court of the house of God, and in the square by the water gate, and in the one by the gate of Ephraim. The whole company that had returned from exile built temporary shelters and lived in them, from the days of Joshua, son of Nun, until that day. The Israelites had not celebrated it like this, and their joy was very great. Day after day, from the first day to the last, Ezra read from the book of the law of God. They celebrated the festival for 7 days, and on the 8th day, in accordance with the regulation, there was an assembly.
So apparently what Robert Alter thinks is that Sukkot had possibly only been celebrated as a harvest festival, right?
Uh-huh.
Because you live in these temporary shelters when you're harvesting your food. And that was, all Passover, Shavuot, Sukkot were all harvest festivals. And then this is the first time it's been given a religious significance. That's what he speculates. And then, of course, they celebrated for 7 days, because in Israel, you do not do double days for holidays, right? 7 days. The 8th day is Shmini Atzeret, is the assembly of the 8th day, which we do not celebrate in the Reform movement, but that's what that is. Okay, so anybody have comments or questions before we go on? No?
Is there any significance that they're excused from grieving?
They're excused from grieving?
Yeah, I mean, I've always thought, and this again might be a myth. I mean, you constantly disillusion me. That, there's rituals for grieving,
Right.
to honor so the fact that they were excused from grieving surprises me. That
wait a minute,
there must be allowance for those that were honoring the dead.
wait a minute. Where does it say they were excused from
He
grieving?
said, do not grieve.
Yeah,
I think he says do not grieve. I don't think he means, I don't think they were grieving because they were mourning somebody. I think that if they were grieving because they were listening to the book of the law and realized, oops, we have not been doing what we were supposed to do. I don't think they were grieving over, you know what I mean?
I hear you. Okay.
Yeah, I think that was the
Yeah.
reason.
The interpretation. Okay. Thank you.
Christine, did you have something you want to add? No. Okay. Lynn? No. Okay. All right. Who is going to read next? Was it Jane or Christine? I don't remember. Jane, you want to read? You go to chapter 9.
Yeah, I'll read.
Thank you.
Let's see, where are, okay. On the 24th day of the same month, the Israelites gathered together, fasting and wearing sackcloth and putting dust on their heads.
See, they're mourning not humans. They're mourning the fact that they have been, sinful. Yeah, go ahead.
And absent from the law, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Those of Israelite descent had separated themselves from all foreigners. They stood in their places and confessed their sins and the sins of their ancestors. They stood where they were and read from the book of the law of the Lord their God for a quarter of the day, and spent another quarter in confession and in worshiping the Lord their God. Standing on the stairs of the Levites were a whole bunch of people.
Yeah, you can skip them.
I am. They cried out with loud voices to the Lord their God. And the Levites said, stand up and praise the Lord your God, who is from everlasting to everlasting. Blessed be your glorious name, and may it be exalted above all blessing and praise. You alone are the Lord. You made the heavens, even the highest heavens, and all their starry host, the earth and all that is on it, the seas and all that is in them. You give life to everything, and the multitudes of heaven worship you. You are the Lord God who chose Abram and brought him out of Ur of the Chaldeans and named him Abraham. You found his heart faithful to you, and you made a covenant with him to give to his descendants the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Jebusites, and Girgashites. You have kept your promise because you are righteous. You saw the suffering of our ancestors in Egypt. You heard their cry at the Red Sea. You sent signs and wonders against Pharaoh and against all his officials and all of the people of his land, for you knew how arrogantly the Egyptians treated them. You made a name for yourself, which remains to this day. You divided the sea before them so that they passed through it on dry ground, but you hurled their pursuers into the depths like a stone into mighty waters. By day you led them with a pillar of cloud, and by night with a pillar of fire to give them light on the way they were to take. Can we stop for a minute
Yeah,
and
let's
take
stop.
a look
Yeah,
at one of these lines?
Because I wanted to ask you if
Oh,
any of
okay.
this looked familiar.
Yeah, I mean, they're sort of giving a summary of the Torah.
Yep. These
Yeah.
are all quotes from the Torah.
Yeah.
So obviously they have more than just the book of Deuteronomy, although as you will see, it's got a sort of Deuteronomic twist to it. But
Right.
yeah, these are all like basically from other parts of the Torah.
Let's go to the line where they said you made a name for yourself. There it is. 10. You sent signs and wonders, did all this, you divided the sea, you made a name for yourself which remains to this day. that line is incredible, Rabbi,
Yeah.
because I remember we've had this discussion, and I've had it in other classes, which is, Moses said to God when God wanted to wipe out,
Yep.
you wipe out the Jews, he said, well, what will the other gods say?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, I
Yep,
mean,
yep.
so there's still this idea. I'm so intrigued by this. There's still this idea that Yahweh is just one of many gods.
Uh-huh.
And he was using the Jews or the Hebrews as a way of increasing his reputation.
Yep.
And it's just, it's so subtle that you would read right over it.
Right. I agree. I completely agree with you. The whole argument that Moses makes about don't wipe them out because what's everyone else going to say? You took them out of Egypt and now you're going to kill them with that, I agree with you. All I can say is, this is written by human beings who can only imagine a God with human traits, even though, there's no way that this is God, right? Oh, I'm jealous, or I want to make a name for myself, or whatever it is.
Uh-huh.
But this is how, as people like Maimonides have said, the Torah is written in human language. Doesn't mean that that's really what God is. Maimonides would go crazy if you ever said that this was literally how God is, that God needs to have a reputation. Because as far as Maimonides is concerned, God is unchangeable and not subject at all to any of the issues that we're subject to. Okay, let's see. Christine, go ahead.
I'm curious because by making a name for yourself, it also kind of implies that the Jews are as necessary to God as God is to them.
Sure.
That you have to have an audience in order to have a name. You have to have people to recognize that you have a reputation. And
Absolutely.
the reference isn't just the other gods. It's like, okay, so who's going to praise you?
No, absolutely. That's,
Yeah.
in a sense, that's, why God created the world, so that there be some beings to reflect, God in some way, right? So yes, that God definitely needs it. Well, don't forget, Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote a book called God in Search of Man, not Man in Search of God.
Right.
Okay, God needs us and calls for us, and we don't listen. Right?
What else is new?
What else is new? What else is new? Right? Okay, but good observation. Thanks for pointing that out, Jane. But yeah, it's how we interpret, God, right? We the only language we have is language that pertains to humans. So that's how we talk about God. But God being angry and jealous, and is that really what God is like? I hope not. It's not the God I believe in, right? Okay, so should we pick it up?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right, let's see. Where were you?
I think we're on 13.
Okay.
You came down on Mount Sinai. You spoke to them from heaven. You gave them regulations and laws that are just and right, and decrees and commands that are good. You made known to them your holy Sabbath and gave them commands, decrees, and laws through your servant Moses. In their hunger, you gave them bread from heaven, and in their thirst, you brought them water from the rock. You told them to go in and take possession of the land you had sworn with uplifted hand to give them. But they, here it comes. But they, our ancestors, became arrogant and stiff-necked, and they did not obey your commands. Christine and I had a long discussion about stiff-necked people because I find it particularly offensive.
Well,
and it comes straight from the Torah.
Keep in mind that Hebrew is very kind of physical as a language, and there aren't like these abstract concepts. Everything is very sort of concrete. So instead of saying stubborn, you say stiff-necked. Instead of saying, I can't think of other things right now.
Stubborn would be.
But instead of saying stubborn, you say stiff-necked, and that's sort of the Hebrew language is kind of like that.
Oh,
but it makes you think of an animal, right?
Right.
A horse.
They refused to listen and failed to remember the miracles you performed among them. They became stiff-necked and in their rebellion appointed a leader in order to return to their slavery. But you are a forgiving God, gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and abounding in love. Therefore, you did not desert them. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Even when, I'm sorry, this is funny.
No,
Even
God
when
ordered
yeah,
people killed because of the golden calf.
right. Even when they cast for themselves an image of a calf and said, "This is your God who brought you out of Egypt," or when they committed awful blasphemies. Because of your great compassion, you did not abandon them in the wilderness. By day, the pillar of cloud did not fail to guide them on their path, nor the pillar of fire by night to shine on the way they were to take. You gave your good spirit to instruct them. You did not withhold your manna from their mouths, and you gave them water for their thirst. For 40 years you sustained them in the wilderness. They lacked nothing. Their clothes did not wear out, nor did their feet become swollen.
But again,
Can
there
I
were
comment-
various.
Can I comment on this?
Yes, please. I was going to.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm taking a class called Holy Moses from Judaism Unbound. And someone brought up the point that we have a lot of detail at the beginning of the Exodus, and we have a lot of detail at the end of the Exodus, but we really don't know very much about what the middle was. And my response to that is you don't need to know it because they were in one place. They were in an oasis. They weren't wandering around trying to find their way to Canaan. But for many years, for the majority of years, they were not wandering. They were in one place. So that's, I think, the reason it skipped over. Nothing is said about this middle period. And of course, there's the famous cartoon, which is that they were in the desert for 40 years until Mrs. Moses asked them.
Right.
Which I love because that reminds me of my father who never asked for directions.
That's funny.
So we were lost all the time.
That's funny. That's funny.
Yeah.
Christine?
Well, because they were herders, I agree with Jane to an extent. But because they were herders, they would have had to go from oasis to oasis because the grazing would have worn out in one place.
That's true.
And so they could have had like a circuit, like most transhuman people.
Yeah.
They had like a circuit, and that's staying in the wilderness,
Uh-huh.
not wandering. You know where the oases are, so you just have a circuit.
Well,
and that way your animals don't deplete the resources.
Well, what I think is great is this, the statement about how compassionate and loving God is and how God forgave them and all that, when in fact, there are a number of occasions during this period when people were killed because they disobeyed or they complained or they did whatever, right? I mean, it wasn't just the golden calf where, the Levites were instructed to kill a few thousand, after God threatened to kill all of them. But there's also people being swallowed up by an earthquake or something because of Pinchas. And there's also when they complained about being sick of manna, they were given, so much quail that, they got sick. I mean, on and on and on. So, it's not completely accurate, correct?
They were compassionate to the ones that weren't killed.
Yeah,
I
guess so. Yes, absolutely. Compassionate to the ones that were not killed.
And I think you see that line often after something terrible has happened. But God is compassionate, sweet, forgiving. And at the same time, running parallel to it is God will punish you unto the fourth generation.
Exactly.
So it's a very schizophrenic Torah, which I
don't disagree with you, actually. Yeah. All right. So let's pick it up. Let's see. Where are we? Okay. I think we're down to 22.
Okay. You gave them kingdoms and nations, allotting to them even the remotest frontiers. They took over the country of Sihon king of Heshbon, and the country of Og, king of Bashan. You made their children as numerous as the stars in the sky. That goes straight back to Genesis and Abraham.
Mhm.
And you brought them into the land that you told their parents to enter and possess. Their children went in and took possession of the land. You subdued before them the Canaanites who lived in the land. You gave the Canaanites into their hands, along with their kings and the peoples of the land, to deal with them as they pleased. They captured fortified cities and fertile land. They took possession of houses filled with all kinds of good things. Wells already dug, vineyards, olive groves, and fruit trees in abundance. They ate to the full and were well nourished. They reveled in your great goodness. But they were disobedient and rebelled against you. They turned their backs on your law. They killed your prophets who had warned them in order to turn them back to you. They committed awful blasphemies. So you delivered them into the hands of their enemies who oppressed them. But when they were oppressed, they cried out to you. From heaven you heard them, and in your great compassion you gave them deliverers who rescued them from the hands of their enemies. But as soon as they were at rest, they did again what was evil in your sight. Then you abandoned them to the hand of their enemies so that they ruled over them. And when they cried out to you again, you heard from heaven, and in your compassion, you delivered them time after time.
Let's stop for a moment because I think there are a couple of hands. Sandy.
Yeah, I was thinking when they talked about wells already dug and vineyards, it reminded me of when the state of Israel and they went into the Palestinian lands and wells were already dug and they took over some of the vineyards and orchards, and
it's an old story, right?
Yeah,
Unfortunately.
it is.
Unfortunately. Yeah. Thank you.
Same old, same old.
Yep. Christine?
Is that I want to say yes, Andy. I was thinking the same thing, but I also was wondering if there were groups within Israel that actually used the Canaanite takeover as the rationale for taking over Palestinian lands.
Yeah,
like all of the
some
rabid ones that are in the Knesset.
Some of the more right-wing rabbis have said that the Palestinians are the Canaanites. And of course, the Palestinians also say we were the Canaanites, meaning we belong here more than you do.
Yeah. Well,
okay, so it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Definitely a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
But you do see here again this theology, right? That God is compassionate and wonderful, and then you mess up every single time, and then you need to be punished. And then you repent, and then you mess up again. And that is this whole Deuteronomic theology.
One of my friends, Alia Arasugli, who's a filmmaker, and now she's living in Egypt, but originally she was in Palestine, but then she grew up in the camps in Lebanon, and then eventually and she basically her political thing is a plague on all of them. Really. I mean, nobody's been good to her people, including their own leaders, right? I mean, so Alia has a very, very judicious kind of sensibility. But in one of the films she made, there's a line that said, "Did you ever wonder who was sitting at the table with the table set when you came in and took over our house?" Which is a wonderful line. I mean, very compassionate. So, that's also out there. Is the leadership of the Palestinians, God knows, but the leadership of the Israelis is nothing to write home about.
Right.
So, but there is this other strain of the basic humanity and recognizing that, we live in layers. My mother used to tell us, had us memorize a poem in first grade which starts out where we walk to school each day. Indian children used to play. Just to always remind you that you're on somebody else's land.
Right.
Yeah.
All righty, let's finish this chapter. All right, here we go. If you don't mind,
Not at all. So, so we're on 32, Rabbi?
no, 29.
Oh, 29. Okay, you warned them in order to turn them back to your law, but they became arrogant and disobeyed your commands. They sinned against your ordinances, of which you said, the person who obeys them will live by them. Stubbornly, they turned their backs on you, became stiff-necked, and refused to listen. For many years, you were patient with them. By your spirit, you warned them through your prophets. Yet they paid no attention, so you gave them into the hands of the neighboring peoples. But in your great mercy, you did not put an end to them or abandon them, for you are a gracious and merciful God. Now, therefore, our God, the great God, mighty and awesome, who keeps his covenant of love, do not let all this hardship seem trifling in your eyes. The hardship that has come on us, on our kings and leaders, on our priests and prophets, on our ancestors and all your people from the days of the kings of Assyria until today. In all that has happened to us, you have remained righteous. You have acted faithfully while we acted wickedly. Our kings, our leaders, our priests, and our ancestors did not follow your law. They did not pay attention to your commands or the statutes you warned them to keep. Even while they were in their kingdom, enjoying your great goodness to them in the spacious and fertile land you gave them, they did not serve you or turn from their evil ways. You know, according to this rationale, the Holocaust is our fault.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's the Deuteronomic theology. You know, if you're bad things are going to happen to you. And that's the horrible thing about the Deuteronomic.
And on the other hand, what you have is so many people of that generation turning away from God because God did not save us from the Holocaust.
Right.
So once again, you have this really schizophrenic, bifurcated, I'm going to use a less obnoxious word, bifurcated point of view. Like, why didn't God step in and save us from this? If he's so gracious and merciful, etc.
Exactly. Okay, let's just read the last few verses and then.
Sure. Okay, I know you want to finish this up. But see, we are slaves today, slaves in the land you gave our ancestors, so they could eat its fruit and other good things it produces. Because of our sins, its abundant harvest goes to the kings you have placed over us. They rule over our bodies and our cattle as they please. We are in great distress. In view of all this, we are making a binding agreement, putting it in writing, and our leaders, our Levites, and our priests are affixing their seals to it.
Thank you very much.
You're
So
welcome.
what we have here is this, you know, horrible theology, which is why I believe the book of Job has been included in our canon, because we have to have a countermeasure to this. I mean, we cannot blame ourselves for all the things that go wrong. Yes, we put out stuff and then, you know, karma, right? Things do come back to us in one way or another, but at the same time, we can't blame ourselves for everything that happens, right? Like you get sick, oh, I must have been bad, that's why I'm sick. You know, you can't do that. So we need to have Job to balance that out a little bit. And some of the Psalms and, you know, some of the wisdom literature is a little more, you know, kind of cynical about, yeah, you know, even bad people have great things happen to them and vice versa, right? So anybody want to comment about that? Or yes, Christine.
I keep coming back to Jane's notion of stiff-neckedness and the embodiment and of the people, right? How the people get embodied. And I'm reminded of some of the physiological consequences of deep trauma. And one is that you lose any trust, right? Gone. You can't trust anything. And one of the manifestations of that in children particularly is that their shoulders become stiff and their necks become stiff. And that with the efforts to heal and to, allow trust to come into being again, that reciprocal trust, you can physically see their shoulders coming down and their necks relaxing.
Wow.
And so some of the stiff-neckedness is the sort of, we've been through an awful lot. Why should we trust anything?
Very, very interesting. Thank you. That's a very interesting observation.
Well, I have to believe that God did not cause the Holocaust.
Of course.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you, Susie. I'm perfectly willing
So
to
do
blame
I,
people.
Susie.
Well, that's why,
Otherwise, I wouldn't go to temple.
yeah, I don't believe in that kind of a God.
Mm.
So, yeah, I mean, I'm very, I mean, yes, we have to take responsibility for our behavior. And yes, there are consequences to our behavior. I don't believe that there's a God up there who's keeping track. I mean, my theology is that God is the force of good that allows us to be better people and allows us to make the world a better place. And that's it. Not God sitting there keeping a ledger, and here's how many diseases you deserve, because I see too many people suffering who don't deserve it. Yes, please, Lori.
I wanted to expand on what Susie said. My husband was a Holocaust survivor. He was 2.5 years old when he and his family had to move. So he had no recollection of what a quote unquote normal life would be. And he used to say I dragged him kicking and screaming back into his religion, but he wanted to believe, and he could not believe as much as he wanted to. He was atheos I think it's the Greek, I'm not sure, literally without a God. And he really, really wanted to believe. I've never talked about this one thing. He had a dream one time, a very vivid dream. And when he started writing about the Holocaust, he started having flashbacks and really bad dreams and had to stop. But this dream he had sometime after that, and in it, the Pope was there and he was there, and there was a great cloud, and he was talking to the Pope and saying that he wanted to believe in God, but he couldn't. And then he woke up and told me what he had been dreaming about. And he really genuinely wanted to believe, but he was incapable of it.
So again, I completely understand that. My mother is a Holocaust survivor.
Sure.
I don't believe in that kind of God. I don't believe in an intervening
No, I don't
God.
either.
I mean, I can't, because then I'm just angry, right? And all I am is angry at God, and there's no redemption.
Yeah.
Period.
But it gave men free will, men and humans free will.
So what I think a wonderful, wonderful essay is by Yitz Greenberg, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, who's a modern Orthodox rabbi. And he writes this piece following a trial that he attends of Nazis who explain that in order to save money on ammunition, rather than first killing babies, they just toss them into the fire.
That's right.
And he says
They speared them too. They speared them like with a thing on their guns. I mean,
wonderful.
He saw babies that were killed that way, and he was just a small child himself.
So, so Greenberg says any theology you come up with has to be arguable in front of an image of 1,000 burning babies.
Mm-hmm.
So he talks about moments faith. In other words, you don't measure your faith by the depth of your faith. You measure it by the frequency. because there are times when you cannot believe, which I think is a very interesting approach. Okay,
What
Christy,
is the name of the essay?
it's called
The title?
Pillar of Smoke, Cloud of Fire, or Pillar of, Pillar of, I think it's called Pillar of Smoke, Cloud of Fire, or something of that combination. I may have a copy around here somewhere that I can give you.
Okay.
I would like to read that also.
Okay.
If Lori
I
wants
think
it
I
first.
may have it actually in my computer, in which case I can send it to everybody.
If you,
Okay.
yeah, if you do, I would.
That would be
really
great.
interested.
Thank you.
Do you have it there, Jane?
Irving Greenberg, Cloud of Smoke, Pillar of Fire. Didn't you send this out to us once, Rabbi? Because I have a copy here.
I use this when I talk about God, when I talk about the Holocaust. I haven't used it for Torah study, so I'll be happy to share it with you. Christine,
Rabbi, I'm thinking of Reverend Jane for a change, and she asked you to address, correct me if I'm wrong from my memory, Reverend Jane, incidentally, is the First Congregational Church, formerly the Reverend of First Congregational Church. And she asked you to talk about the vengeful God of the Hebrews. I don't know if that's... I'm just wondering if the Greek interpretation, I know we talk about monotheism and one God, and yet at the same time, this ambiguity, this convoluted God of ours that I have trouble with, as you know, just is hard to believe.
Yeah, I mean, I have spoken about, the whole issue of justice and God, but again, I don't believe in a God that runs the world. I don't believe in that kind of God. So if you believe in that, then there's certain consequences, that are hard. Yeah, Christine, go ahead.
One of my friends, Helen, who was a Hungarian Jew and was in the camps and managed to get out because they took measurements of her and decided that it was a mistake the way she was labeled and that she was really an Aryan.
Oh.
After she was doing forced labor for about a year and a half. And Helen was just very, very, she was a chemist. And Helen told me that, because we were talking about this one time, she was at Northeastern with me. And I said, there's no question of belief when it comes to the Holocaust. You can't do it. But I said, and she said, yeah, but she said, you know where God was? God was in the acts that people did, little acts of kindness, the bringing back of the potato peels you've stolen instead of eating them yourself and sharing them with other people in the barracks. She said that to me was God.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's what we have to believe.
Yeah.
Again, if you believe in the traditional God, then yeah, we were punished for being bad. There's no other way to explain it. If you believe in the Deuteronomic idea about who God is, then yeah, we deserve the Holocaust. We deserve all the bad things that happened to us. I
wouldn't have been able to be a Jew under the Deuteronomic interpretation.
Me too.
Why?
Me neither.
Why, Lori?
Well, because I believe that God is merciful and loving, and that because we have free will, he can't control everything that goes on in the world.
Right.
And I think Hitler was evil.
Yeah.
And he may have been a person, but I think he was evil.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I don't want to start another chapter yet, but we're going to be finishing the book of Nehemiah next time. So I think that leaves us with 1 or 2 sessions, and we have to figure out what to do. Now we could do some of let's say Isaiah the prophet.
Yes, please.
Just because there were people who wanted to do that, and we could look at that a little bit. Just as a little taste of the book of the prophets. But we've really actually gone quite far over the course of the last whatever number of years. But I think we'll stop now because otherwise we'll get started and we won't be able to talk about it. But next time we'll finish the book of Nehemiah.
This was a fantastic session. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes,
it was
thank you,
really
Hannah.
good.
I'm
Really
so glad.
good.
Yes.
And thank you, everybody,
Thank
for
you.
your insights. and-
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for
So interesting. Oh, my.
Rabbi, what's the name of the women's Torah that you have there?
the women's, it's called the Torah, a women's commentary.
Okay,
And it's
Thank
green.
you.
It's green.
okay.
All right. Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
And don't
Thank
forget
you.
tomorrow, by the way, I hope you can come 11 a.m.
I'll be
It's really-
there.
But
Yeah,
it's
it's really
on
for
Zoom
Palestinians.
only. Jason didn't say it was only on Zoom. Isn't it only on Zoom?
It's only on Zoom
No,
because
he
they're
did
in
say
Israel.
that. He said it at the very end. The last thing he said was that it was only on Zoom.
Yeah, it's only on Zoom because the people who are presenting are in Israel.
Oh.
Christine.
Okay, that's a good reason.
Okay. All right.
Okay,
See you.
interesting.
Hope to see
Thank
you
you.
tomorrow. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Shabbat Shalom.
Bye.
Okay,
Shabbat
thank you.
Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.